Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the only one that it's early for. I'm from the West Coast. I'm assuming all of you, most of you are from the Midwest, so it should be late enough for you guys that everyone's awake, and hopefully you got some coffee. But so what we're going to talk about today, as Rory mentioned, is we're going to talk about a recent success study that we had, a success story, I should say, with one of our clients, CBRE, where we helped them kind of maneuver through what was originally viewed as a unique and relatively complex project in migrating an executive dashboard from Tableau to Cognos. So we're going to talk about kind of what happened with the story, talk about what the business problem was originally, what we proposed to them in terms of a solution, some of the lessons that we learned, both of ourselves and the client, and also talk about some of the best practices that we were able to incorporate for you guys to be able to hopefully take some of that content back with you and incorporate it into what you guys do from a reporting standpoint. Okay. So by way of introduction, as I mentioned, my name is Kevin Emanuel. I'm the Director of Software Solutions at PMsquare. I've been in this space for just about 12 years. The first couple of years, I was actually in your shoes as an IBM customer when I was working in the financial reporting team at Home Depot for a couple of years. Shortly after that, I joined the other side, if you will, and I started to kind of help customers start to implement analytic solutions and essentially do what I used to do at Home Depot, but in a much more efficient way. So I've been on the account management and delivery, solution delivery side for about just over a decade. So analytics is a big passion of mine. As we talked about in the keynote and Dustin mentioned, it's an industry that's constantly evolving. Right now, I think is a very exciting time to be involved in it. So very much like the fact that I'm doing this. I enjoy it now more than I did even 12 years ago. I've got Mike DeGois here with me as well. Mike, if you want to do a quick intro.
Sure, yeah. I'm Mike DeGois. I'm Services Director and a Senior Solutions Architect at PMsquare. I've been in the space for 14 or 15 years now, working with the IBM platform primarily throughout that time, but just with that much time in this space, touched a number of other analytics tools as well, and kind of been involved in the whole data delivery cycle from the database, DBA side of things, all the way through visualizing data on the other side. And I was actively involved in this project with CBRE, so I'm going to talk through some of the technical challenges that we faced and provide some details about how we overcame those and how we delivered a solution that was effective for CBRE.
So sort of the agenda that we have for you guys is I want to talk quickly about CBRE. So the CBRE folks were actually supposed to be here and present with us this success story, but they got pulled back at the last minute. Big busy time for them during their budget cycle. So I'm going to be representing CBRE since I managed the account for the past 5 years. Talk about who they are as a company, what their primary business problem was, the solution that we deployed for them, and then I'll hand things over to Mike to talk a little bit more detail from a technical standpoint, what we actually delivered, do a quick demo for you guys, what the overarching success story was, and some of the lessons that we learned as well. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end that we're happy to field any questions that you may have. So CBRE, by definition, CBRE is a premier globally integrated commercial real estate services and investment firm. That's a bit of a mouthful for description, but I'm sure many, if not all of you, have seen CBRE signs on the side of buildings, on construction sites, perhaps in some of the buildings that you work in, where CBRE is behind managing the building. So what CBRE does is they're a full-service commercial real estate company, and they offer services across the entire gamut of commercial real estate. They've been around since 1906. They're a global company, about 450 global offices across 100 countries, and they employ over 80,000 people. While they do service, offer a lot of different services, if you were to break down their business into three primary areas, those would be the advisory services, global workplace solutions, and real estate investments. The advisory services is where they offer consulting and valuation services for both lenders, occupiers, as well as investors. The GWS, or Global Workplace Solutions, is a division that handles anything from a maintenance standpoint. So maintaining the buildings, commercial offices, laboratories, manufacturing plants, that's where GWS comes in. And then lastly, the real estate investment side, or the REI, is where they do just that. They offer a number of different investment vehicles for people that want to get into the commercial real estate side, whether it's individuals, institutions, and so forth. They provide some advisory services there, and also some vehicles for you guys to be able to, for people to be able to get into the investment side. And lastly, they are a Fortune 200 company now. They're ranked number 146. So large, complex, and thriving organization, which is part of the reason that it's been very exciting to work with these guys over the past few years. So that's a bit of history about CBRE and who they are. Let's talk about what their business problem was and what we deployed for them. So originally, before we got, so we've done a number of different projects for them, but for this particular project that we're going to talk about, before we got involved, they actually took it upon themselves to build a framework for this executive dashboard, and they built a POC in Tableau on what they wanted this report to look like and do. So once they actually had this POC in place and they sent it around the globe to all their regional CFOs for approvals, they start to realize that if they want to scale this thing, they're going to have some issues they have to overcome. And there were enough issues that they had to consider what other tool to use for this report at the end of the day. Obviously, a large organization, so they have a lot of different reporting tools. They had Cognos, they had Tableau, in some parts they have Power BI, and they also have OBIE. So again, going through the evaluation process, doing another POC, figuring out what tools are best, and ultimately we were able to kind of show them that Cognos was the best option for them, given some of the parameters and requirements that they had for this particular project. So I'll talk about those at a very high level. First and foremost, the biggest problem they had was from a data standpoint. In order for them to be able to deliver this report through Tableau, there was a data extraction process that needed to take place from TM1, and then that data had to be imported into Tableau for them to be able to refresh their data every time. So not only did that create a manual process for that, but it also didn't allow them to have the latest and greatest data readily available in those reports as they were consuming them. There was always a lag. So taking that over to Cognos, obviously Cognos and Planning Analytics, or TM1, fully integrated. It allowed them to be able to access data live as there were tweaks being made in TM1. That information was available readily in Cognos for the reports. The second thing that we had to take into consideration was the level of detail that they wanted. So given the fact that this dashboard was being really consumed by a variety of different people, anywhere from C-level executives to analysts, there were people that wanted to see high-level executive summary data, but there were also people that wanted to see down to the GL level data of their financials. So providing that level of detail was problematic in Tableau, whereas in Cognos, again, having both TM1 and Cognos integrated, we actually were able to bring in even GL level data on one of the tabs in the executive dashboard that we were able to create for them. So everything kind of came together within one tool, and they didn't have to leave reporting and go to TM1 for that detailed level data that they needed. Thirdly, in order for them to scale out, it required a lot of additional work within Tableau to rebuild the security model that was required for them. Again, being a large organization, various different geographies and different roles, different groups, there was already a security model that was built in TM1. And it was a lot easier to manage that through Cognos. So what we did here is we used Cognos as the authentication source, connected through AD, and that unified their TM1 environment and the reporting system in a much more seamless fashion. Fourthly, as I mentioned before we actually got engaged, there was this original POC, or the framework was already sent for approvals through the global team. So when we came in, there was no room for error. This thing was already approved, and we had to build something that was identical to what they had already gotten approved. And as many of you might have worked with different reporting tools could probably attest to, while you can accomplish the same exact thing from a data visualization standpoint across different tools, a lot of times they end up looking slightly different because of feature functionality. But we were able to use some custom development techniques to build a report in Cognos that was identical to what they had in Tableau, and there was no need to go back and ask for approvals again and get the aesthetics and the feature functionalities approved again. And lastly, that was, by doing that, we were able to kind of get rid of this misconception or the perception that, Cognos doesn't have the visuals that they needed on par with what Tableau offers. After we did the first phase of this project, where we mimicked exactly what they had, we were actually able to go back and start having some additional dialogue with them. And we actually improved some of the visuals, as Mike will show you in just a few minutes, that enhanced the look and feel, the functionality of some of the graphics that we had in the dashboard. So ended up actually becoming something more than what they had originally set out from the beginning. So with that said, I'm going to hand things over to Mike. He's going to talk about some of the technical challenges and show you guys a sneak peek as well.
Thanks, Kevin. So just to build a little bit on what Kevin was just explaining, when we first came in, we kind of had some discussion about how they had already built this POC, and that overall they were getting good feedback on it, but they were open to kind of our suggestions in terms of data visualization best practices. And so when we first kind of started the project, we showed them an initial version that had some kind of improvements, and we kind of ended up having to take a step back, and because they, as Ken was explaining, they really had gone through this whole approval process. So we often, when we talk to customers, we talk about splitting out requirements and specifications. Requirements is really the problems that you're trying to solve with the solution, and then specifications is exactly how you're going to build it. And so they had kind of already nailed down these specifications. And so in order to deliver something that looked extremely similar to what they'd already created in Tableau, presented some challenges. Not really, because at this point, Cognos is inferior from a visualization standpoint to Tableau. It's pretty similar, but just because things tend to render a little bit differently, functionality tends to work a little bit differently across different tools, as Kevin mentioned. So I'm going to first just kind of run through. We have some little screen capture videos here of what the thing looks like, and then I'm going to kind of return to how we accomplish some of the things that we accomplished in this project. So I'll just talk through kind of a few aspects of this while this is playing. So one thing that was super important to them was having everything connected that you're seeing on the screen at a particular point in time, and then there even being some connection points as you switch between tabs. You see that there's kind of this tab interface here at the top. This tooltip functionality too, I'll return to later. That was something that, frankly, Tableau has very good built-in tooltip functionality. Cognos is what you have from a built-in standpoint is a little bit weaker. So we needed to find a way to address that, and so we were able to accomplish that there. These tree prompts over here on the side is actually something that they didn't have in Tableau, and really liked the ability that they could easily deploy prompt controls that allow them to navigate down through hierarchies and select elements at different levels of hierarchies, as opposed to just having to deal with kind of like drop-down lists and try to figure out what you're looking for that way. So that was an enhancement we were able to implement. They also had these kind of two charts here at the bottom, which they wanted the flexibility to either have them show basically split out by different dimensions, like here you see country group on one side and LOB on the other, or be able to choose the same on both sides and then just choose different measures and kind of do a comparison. So there's kind of a lot of things here, kind of business logic that's embedded. Like if they did choose the same on both sides, they wanted the ordering to be the same, but only if they chose the same dimension and the same level on both sides. Otherwise, the sorting should be kind of natural according to that particular dimension. This breadcrumb functionality here allows the user to kind of see where they are within a hierarchy and then jump back to a certain point. That was something that Tableau kind of had a similar sort of functionality where you click down through the different charts and it kind of would expand outward. So we were able to address it in Cognos in a slightly different way, but in a way they actually preferred to the original Tableau version. So as the user selects basically any of these elements here, the key metrics at the top update, as well as the visualizations down below. Users can click on any of these items to drill down to a level deeper. And this here at the bottom, for those of you who are familiar with Cognos development, these are actually using custom RAVE visualizations that allowed us to kind of have these achievement bars, if you will, the solid lines and the dotted lines, and accomplish exactly what they were looking for from a data visualization standpoint. One other thing, or I guess a couple other things to mention here. So this notes and definitions down there, again, kind of simple on one hand. It's really an enhanced tooltip, but I thought that was kind of a nice user interface element that they included in all of these. Is if you want to just get a little bit of information about how to use this. Obviously, it's pretty simple, but including just a little bit of user help in the bottom right-hand corner was a nice touch and something that we were able to replicate here with kind of a custom tooltip. So that just shows again on another tab here. We just kind of switch tabs at the top, how that element remains in place. We also, whatever the user's chosen there on the right, if it's applicable to the next tab, that kind of stays in context as you switch tabs. You'll see here there's kind of some out of range values. Previously in the Tableau version, those values were kind of skewing the numbers because they had to be shown there in order to get the correct totals. We were able to, in Cognos, say certain values are out of range, still display a text label that those exist, but have the bars not get skewed by those out of range numbers. Okay, this is just a little bit different sort of view here.
Mike, is
Sorry,
that
I
a
have a
question?
question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The notes and definitions, is that something that you custom built, or I haven't seen that before? Is that
We did custom build it, but it's very simple. I can actually have a slide a little bit later that kind of shows
Okay.
what that looks like. There's basically just kind of a hidden block that you're showing whenever a user mouses over that.
Okay.
And you can do that just with CSS.
Yep.
Doesn't even require any custom JavaScript. So this is another view that just kind of shows some trending as well, and includes some of the same common user interface elements as the other versions. Same notes and definitions. I'm trying to think if there's anything else here that's kind of distinct that's going to show up in this video. Yeah, I think the core elements that are different. Oh yeah, we did some custom tooltips here on these charts as well. Again, we needed to overcome just the plain text and single measure value that you usually get with the Cognos chart. So we kind of showed these little icons down here. I know they're a little hard to see, especially if you're in the back, but there's little informational icons. And if you mouse over those, you're able to see that kind of rich text label for those bars. Okay, then this view here is distinct, obviously, but because it includes some geocoding, a geographic kind of view of the data. And I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about how we accomplished this. There were some specific technical challenges here. So this map is actually loading up in an iframe, and it's interacting if a user drills down over here on the right, or it can't be seen on all the way on the right there, but you still have the same menu bar available there. Any options that you choose are getting passed into that iframe. And so you can choose which level you want to see the data at from a regional standpoint, like you want to actually have it visualized in terms of country or city level, or I think continent might have been an option there as well. And then you can choose whether you want to see the variance or variance percent. And everything's still connected, even though that's technically loading in an iframe. And I'll talk about why we did it that way.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Sorry, is that okay?
It's totally fine. Sorry, I should have said at the outset. You're
Okay,
welcome at any point to interrupt me.
As the video is playing, it seems like the reaction time to load is very fast. What's the underlying data source that you used?
Oh, yeah, so this is TM1, or Planning Analytics.
Like did you use a pre-populated data set, or was it direct connect via a module or package?
We're just directly connect. I mean, so but I'm going to talk about that a little bit. We created a reporting cube, so
okay.
kind of purpose built for this.
Yeah.
So there's not a whole lot of like calculations that are
Yeah.
going on. Almost everything's pre-aggregated that's needed for these reports, so that definitely helped improve the
Yeah.
performance. Okay, and this is just a little bit of a different sort of output here from the others. So the others were all very visualization centric. This one we had actually previously created for them an active report that presented similar sorts of information. But a key element of it is this data grid here. So they want to be able to see actual individual values as opposed to just seeing kind of relative values visualized on a chart. So this is actually very interactive. The user can kind of choose their own set, essentially, over here on the left, and whichever options they choose end up flowing down here and update the chart accordingly. If they choose kind of the view, they change the view that they want to see, whatever they've chosen here on the left actually flips over and turns into a filter, and then they can choose by geography, for instance, and create their geography set and view the data that way. So again, this fits into kind of the whole context. There's just another tab here at the top, so still your time frame and such gets passed over as you switch tabs, but it's just different sort of dashboard view. Okay, so let's talk about some technical implementation details here. How many folks in the room here actually do report development in Cognos Analytics? So I got my audience. Okay, all right, we got a few. So for those of you who don't, some of this might be a little bit in the weeds, but hopefully you'll still pick up some good nuggets here. So in order to accomplish all of this, here's some of the techniques we used. One, we made extensive use of classes or styles in Cognos, as well as layout component references. So classes and styles are really just implementation of CSS inside Cognos. It allows you to designate in one place a particular style, essentially, and then you can reuse it across different reports. So in this case, we had these different tabs. Those are actually different report objects in Cognos. But we referenced in one other report object, we had definitions for all the styles that we were using. So we were able to maintain a consistent look and feel across the entire dashboard. Similarly, with layout component references, you can basically designate some sort of a block, some sort of an object in one place, and then you can reuse it across. So for instance, those prompt controls, we don't have to define them specifically in each individual dashboard tab. We can specify those in one place, and then we can just reuse them as needed. We combined multiple reports into one unified dashboard using those layout component references, like I just mentioned, as well as drill through definitions. So we actually had a team of, at one point, I think there were 3 different developers who were working on this. And so we didn't want to have this all combined into one Cognos report that we're trying to be like, are you working on it right now? No, I'm not. Okay, let me check it out for a while. We wanted to be able to have it split out so you're working on this tab, I'm working on this tab, you're working on that tab. And we also just didn't want to have one massive Cognos report specification. For some of you who have worked in the tool, you know that can become a little unwieldy. It's basically building out a bunch of XML in the background. That can start to kind of like slow your report development process down if that thing gets too huge. So we wanted to be able to split it out, and so we were able to do that by using those layout component references and then using drill through definitions so that the prompt values are passed between each tab as you click. And so that ended up working out really well, where it splits out the reports from a development standpoint, but from a user standpoint, it appears as one dashboard. We also used some custom visualizations, as I mentioned on that first sheet that we looked at. That was a custom RAID visualization that Cognos Paul helped us out with in order to deliver exactly what they were looking for. Now, we could have, of course, done something very, very similar in Cognos with the built-in visualizations. It was essentially a bar chart, but there were some very specific ways that they wanted the data to look, and so we were able to go to Rave in order to deliver that very precisely. So this advanced drill-through configuration for the breadcrumbs. So this kind of leads into talking about 2 bullets down, combining non-interactive mode and interactive mode. So there's some really cool functionality that's built into Cognos. It's been in there for quite some time, called advanced drill-through configuration. And this allows you a lot of kind of minute control over what happens when you click something in a dimensional source, and you drill down, and how other data elements are affected, or what happens on that particular element when you click. It doesn't necessarily just have to go down to the next level. You can basically control all of that. And so we needed to tap into that functionality in order to enable that breadcrumb sort of view so the user could see where they were in the hierarchies. In order to do that, you have to run a report in what's called non-fully interactive mode in Cognos. Some of you probably know what that is, but essentially it's a version, it's a way of running the report that's been there since Cognos 10 or maybe even before. There's a new version called fully interactive mode that was introduced in Cognos 11. I won't get into all the details of the difference between the two, but there are some things you can do in one mode. There are other things you can only do in another mode. So the advanced drill-through configuration could only be done in non-fully interactive mode. The map that we had to use could only be utilized in fully interactive mode. So I know this is getting very into the weeds, but this is why we had to do that iframe that I mentioned. We actually had to iframe the map and have it run in fully interactive mode and have parameters passed to it from the rest of the dashboard, which was running in the non-fully interactive mode. So this was just a distinct sort of technical challenge that we had to overcome that we were able to do with some custom JavaScript, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute. I also mentioned the custom CSS for tooltips. I have an example of that. That allows us to create those kind of rich text tooltips, which they were getting with Tableau. So just a little bit more about what we did with custom JavaScript. There are really three main things we used it for. One was to pull together those interactive and non-interactive mode elements, so passing those prompt values over to the iframe. Another was dynamically setting the current month. The way that they had things set up in Tableau previously was be able to choose from a whole list of months, and they needed all of the months selected up to the current month. And so that wasn't something that we were able to do with the default Cognos built-in functionality, but there was just a small bit of JavaScript that was able to look at the current month and then select the appropriate elements as soon as the dashboard loads. And then finally, the Cognos tree prompt, super useful. They loved it. But because of some technical details on the TM1 side, which I wouldn't be able to fully explain because that's not my area of expertise, they had to append a string essentially to the end of each label for the data that they wanted to display in those controls. And so we were able to use some JavaScript to essentially strip out that extra string. It was like an underscore map at the end of each member, so it would display in a normal way to the users. Okay, so this is just kind of a glimpse into the actual report spec behind the scenes here for what we actually looked at in the video clip earlier. So you can see a couple of the things that I've talked about here. There's some HTML items that are basically saying, hey, this is going to be a hidden block. There's some other ones that include the CSS that enable some of these things. You can see the drill through links there at the top. That's actually a layout component reference. So that's included in each report, but it's maintained all in one place. And I don't recall the details of which other elements are layout component references, but I think like the header here, I think at least kind of the structure around it as a layout component reference. Those of you who are Cognos developers, you know you can override aspects of it. So this block here, you could say, I want to reuse this, but I want to override what the actual text is for the title. So we made extensive use of that sort of thing. And here's some of that actual CSS. Obviously, it's probably going to be a little hard to read from where everybody's sitting, but this is what was used for those custom tooltips. So a lot of it's just styling. You're just saying, I want the padding to be this, I want the border to be such. And then there's a little bit of kind of special stuff there at the bottom that allows you to kind of show or hide when the user mouses over. And if you're interested in doing something like this, we're happy to share these code snippets. So from the planning analytics side, there are a few things that we found effective in order to deliver the solution. So one was planning the right reporting cube. So again, I wasn't actively involved in the architecture from the planning analytics side or TM1 side of the house, but kind of worked with the team to make sure that we had what we needed for reporting. But we did find that getting to the right solution was creating a dedicated reporting cube that didn't have too many processes and calculations running on the back end because we wanted to deliver the best performance possible. Leveling hierarchies when possible is helpful for report development in Cognos. Sometimes you just have straight up ragged hierarchies. There's no way you can level them. But for something like your time dimension, at least, you generally can turn that into a leveled hierarchy. You can assign level names. So it's pretty easy to do in TM1, but a lot of times it's not something that your TM1 modeler or architect might be used to doing, because if you haven't developed reports on top of your planning analytics data sources before, you just didn't have a reason to do this. So you basically just define the levels and you run a process, it updates it, and then Cognos can see those levels. There was also security implementation, which we ended up kind of putting in place a little bit after the fact. So in other words, after we'd already done a good bit of development. In the future, we would have implemented it more at the beginning and done some testing, because it ended up, the way that the security flows through into Cognos is a little bit strange. You got to kind of code for it. And so we were able to adapt the reports without too much trouble, but we did kind of find there were some gotchas there. And then just from an automation standpoint, this is creating the TI processes and such that kind of make the ongoing data loads an automated process, so that doesn't have to be done manually once this content went into production. So the bottom line from kind of a success story standpoint is that we were able to replicate what was in the Tableau POC dashboard, along with some enhancements. better conditional data formatting. This basically just means that we're able to look at the value of a number, and for instance, if it's over 1 billion, then display it in billions. If it's over 1 million, display it in millions. If it's in the thousands, display it in K and thousands. That was something they were able to accomplish in Tableau. We did in Cognos. The tree prompt controls I mentioned. There was a situation where they wanted to be able to combine 2 tabs into one. They had to split them out in Tableau because of just some limitations of the tool. And in Cognos, we were able to easily accomplish that. I talked about removing data points from display in a visualization, but still including them in the totals. And then superior replacement for the waterfall visualization. So I want to talk about this a little bit because this is kind of a cool story, I think. But in order to tell it, I just want to give a very brief background on some of the data visualization best practices that we try to apply. 10 minutes, all right, cool. So there's something called pre-attentive visual attributes that are very useful when you're creating visualizations. The idea here is that you have kind of whole objects that are made up of visual attributes. So if we're talking about a table here, it's kind of made up, you have the length of it, the location, the room where it sits, the shape, the color of it. But those individual elements can be very quickly processed in sort of a broadband manner, whereas taking in the whole takes your brain like a little bit of brain power. So a great example of this, of harnessing the power of these pre-attentive visual attributes, is here in this list. So if I were to ask you how many 5s are included in this string of numbers here, some of you are probably starting to try to do it. Those of you who can see the screen, count them up. It takes some time to figure it out. You got to kind of look through each individual number. But if we harness the power of essentially color here in one capacity, how dark or light it is, you can now immediately see that there's 6 5s in this list. So this is the sort of thing we're trying to accomplish when we create a data visualization. It's not just to create a pretty picture of your data. It's to help you learn something about your data that you wouldn't have seen if you were just looking at a list of numbers. So there's a number of different pre-attentive attributes, but there's some that are particularly helpful in terms of data visualization. So things like size, length of a line, 2D position, these are things that the brain can compute very quickly. And there's all kinds of theories about explanations for this, like evolutionarily, like why that takes place, like why certain things we can perceive more clearly than others. But we know which ones we can. Those have been determined through many years of kind of studying how the human brain processes visuals. And so line length and spatial position are 2 that are kind of the most effective, which is why we see a lot of bar graphs. And then color and size can be used kind of secondarily as well, but they're not quite as effective for us determining specific values as line length and 2D position. So if we're going to use color, there's actually specific ways we should be using color. This is the thing a lot of people don't realize when they start getting into data visualization. They're just like, oh, well, maybe at best they're applying kind of their corporate color scheme. But there's actually these concepts of hue, value, and chroma. I'm not going to totally go into this now, but basically you can kind of see what they are just with the labels at the top. Hue is kind of like blue versus green, one color versus another. Value is how light or dark it is, and then chroma is basically how saturated a particular color is. So if you want to highlight data, you should really be using value and chroma. If you want to group items together, use different hues. And if you want to encode quantitative values, you usually are using value. You sometimes can use chroma a little bit. And this is just kind of, the brain can easily make sense of things if you kind of follow this pattern. And so this kind of sums up those data visualization principles. They should communicate something you wouldn't have seen in the table of numbers. You should ask yourself, do the prominent visual effects convey relevant content? That means you shouldn't have a bunch of extraneous stuff on your visualization. Things like 3 dimensions are very distracting from the actual message you're trying to convey. You should be choosing the appropriate type of graph for your data. It's usually not named after food. That rules out pie charts and donut charts. And you should use color, but only when needed, to highlight, group, and encode quantitative values. Okay, so getting back to what we actually did for CBRE, here's one of the visualizations that they had. This was their waterfall chart. They were very excited about this waterfall chart. I've actually worked with a number of clients that are very excited about waterfall charts, and waterfall charts are not inherently bad, but there were some problems with this one. The most significant problem was, if you can read the numbers, this here is labeled 2,780,000, or I'm sorry, this is in millions, so whatever, 2 billion. 2,782 million. This one's labeled 318 million, yet the 318 million one is actually larger than this one. So it's a very deceptive chart. And if you resize the screen, some of this would rectify itself a little bit, but this is the way that it was basically trying to, Tableau is implementing responsive design. And if your screen size was a certain size, it would completely skew your bars. You also notice it's really hard to make any determination from a visual standpoint about the relative contributions of Canada through FX there at the end. Really all you can see in terms of size of length of the bar is US. So here's essentially a Cognos rendered version of this. I don't remember if this one actually made in Cognos or if this one was generated from Tableau as well. But this partially solves the problem because now US is accurately, or at least it looks like it could be accurately relative to the year-to-date prior year and the year-to-date actual. But we still have the same problem where we really can make no determination at all about the other countries contributing here. So it's still not a very effective visualization. Another problem here is that a waterfall kind of implies a progression. These are really just kind of like lists of regions. There's not a true progression from one to another. Now there could be kind of inherently in the way people think of things in the business, but it's theoretically at least another problem here with this visualization. So here's an alternative that we came up with. This was just kind of initially from looking at what they had and some initial discussions about how we could represent the data a little bit differently. And so a couple significant changes here. One is just breaking out the actual and prior year comparison because they're kind of on a different scale than these others. And so this allows you to still do that comparison, see actual to prior year, which is an important comparison point, and then also see the relative contribution of these other values. And some of them are still, of course, very, very small, so they're going to be very small bars. But you get a little bit extra information here. You can now actually can see that Canada is significantly larger than Mexico or Brazil, which you couldn't see from actually looking at the bars in the previous version. We also just call out at a glance some significant data points here. So year-to-date actual is up 12.7%. You can see that immediately. And then the contribution is to a $353.1 million increase by geography. After reviewing this with the CBRE team, we actually had kind of a brainstorming session and talking to some of the executives who were using this. We actually found out that what they would do is look at this fee revenue version. Of course, they had the waterfall, but they had a fee revenue version of the waterfall and an EBITDA version of the waterfall, and they would do some comparisons of the two kind of in their heads and would be coming up with operating leverage. And really no one knew that except the users. That's what they were actually doing ultimately. So after having that discussion, we're able to say, oh, well, we could actually give you operating leverage on the visualization. You could still have kind of how it was calculated here as well. So this is sort of the final version that we came up with that gave them this thing that they were previously calculating in their head. They can now see at a glance, while also giving them a more accurate representation of the numbers that went into those calculations. Josh? So just a couple other lessons learned at the end of the project. Important to solidify the cube structure and the naming up front. There was just some things changing in the cube as we were developing, and that created some rework. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, just clear upfront communication when migrating from an existing application. What do we actually have the ability to change here versus what needs to stay the same? Even that waterfall chart change that we made, that required a lot of dialogue to get to a place where we could actually do it differently because they had already got those approvals. There are some future plans to enhance this, so create some additional views, add drill through to the detail at various points where it makes sense, and then securely expose to the web for access on mobile devices. And then this is just kind of one other very brief thing I wanted to tag on. So we're actually doing another project for another team at CBRE now. As Kevin talked about, it's a large organization, a lot of different groups. And rather than starting from, they already have a solution, a POC that was built in another tool, instead we're starting completely from scratch. And so this is actually something that one of the users, really our main point of contact who we're working with, who had a vision for this tool, she actually drew this up on a sheet of paper. I sat down with her. There's actually a bunch of these sort of sheets. She had some certain ideas about what she kind of wanted to see. And we've had this collaborative, iterative process that we worked through with her to bring some of this to reality. So I just have a screenshot here. We're not going to do videos or anything. But this just kind of shows how we took a concept from just a rough sketch on paper and turned it into this kind of interactive, visually attractive dashboard. So the concept of this here is that here's a bunch of KPIs that they track, some different accounts that they want to pay attention to. Any of these they can click on, and then over here on the right, it loads a relevant dashboard. So for instance, the first one here is, first KPI is assets under management. When you click that, you have right here kind of your summary values, but then over here on the right, you have a whole bunch of information, a whole bunch of visualizations that pertain to that particular metric. And as users change these items here, these parameters, it actually will update over here on the right. So if they want to do a different basic comparison, they want to compare to previous year rather than compare to plan, they can change that here. This view updates, and then over here on the right will update as well with updated visualizations. And then these visualizations on the right are also interactive as well, where you can drill down and such. And there's a whole kind of technical story about how we did this as well, which you don't have time for today, but I just kind of wanted to give a little bit of a glimpse to a different sort of approach that we can take as well when there isn't already a defined set of specifications about what a dashboard should look like. All right, that wraps it. Questions? Sir?
Yes. Could you summarize maybe what was their driving reason for starting with Tableau, or what was the reason they went from Tableau to Cognos Analytics? I want that argument so I can bring that to somebody who's thinking about Tableau.
Sure. So what we see at a lot of customers is the reason that it starts with Tableau is pretty simple. It's because it's very easy to download Tableau and start creating some stuff in Tableau. If you want to pull from a spreadsheet or from a CSV, you can go out, you can download a trial of Tableau, and you can start building something, you can create something pretty quickly. That's often how it gets a foothold. And so I don't know if that's exactly how it originally started at CBRE, but they started in some different groups where they just they wanted to come up with a concept for something, and then they kind of they started socializing it, and it kind of evolved, and just they got to the point where they actually got approvals based on what they built in Tableau. But Kevin went through just some of the limitations. There were things like, well, now I got to run a data extraction process from TM1 every single time you want to update this dashboard, and that's going to get unwieldy. We now have to have security model in two different places. We already have one in TM1, but now we also have to have a Tableau security model. So there were some things just from a scalability standpoint they realized were going to be significant barriers. And so they said, well, hey, Cognos actually ties in directly to TM1, so why don't we look at that? And as he mentioned, the real reason that they were apprehensive about it at first is because Tableau's done a very good job of promoting this message that they are the data visualization experts, and you can create things that are more beautiful in Tableau than you can in any other tool. And I think there was some truth to that for a while. The reality is just really in any of these BI tools you can create pretty pictures now. So you got to look at kind of other reasons for using one versus the other, like scalability.
Yeah, the other thing I would say was the perception that Tableau is just this new and easy to use kind of tool that that we're used to what Cognos used to offer in Cognos 10 and Cognos 8, whereas Cognos 11 obviously is considerably different when it comes to self-service and kind of building things on the fly. Whereas they had this perception that Tableau is just so easy to use, whereas Cognos is not. So that was one of the initial things that kind of started it, I think.
Any other questions? All right, if any other questions come up, feel free to just come up and grab Kevin or myself, either right after this or at any point during the next couple days. Thanks so much for your attention. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.